out, feel free to email me at richard.thompson@lipscomb.edu. And I'll be glad to do what I can to find somebody who can answer it. So James has an announcement up here for you. If y'all seen that about the M&Ms?
Yeah, you can skip it going
group, meeting at October the 8th at 4 o'clock at 2 a.m. So here we are, and today we are almost 2/3 of the way through here. We're going to be doing chapters 25 through 30, which is 6 chapters. That's a lot of ground to cover. Some of it you're pretty familiar with. They're very familiar Old Testament stories. So hopefully we'll get through all that. If we don't, next week we only have 4 chapters in 31 through 34. So we'll finish up next week if we don't get all the way through today. So we're going to pick up here in 25 and the beginning of 25. Change glasses here. We have this brief introduction about Abraham's death and his descendants. He takes a second wife named Keturah, and then she fathers a number of children as well. And in verse 5, we have a very important concept here. Come in, Brother Lord. Verse 5 says that Abraham gave all he had to Isaac, but to the sons of his concubines, Abraham gave gifts, and while he was still living, he sent them away from his son Isaac eastward to the east country. So this is kind of where they went. And what he's doing here, you can see he gives everything to Isaac. You know, the firstborn is supposed to get at least 50% of the inheritance. He gives everything pretty much to Isaac. He does provide gifts for some of his other children, but he sends them way over here to what we would call Jordan now, and kind of creating a separation between God's people, the Israelites, and the Arab people that will basically descend from Ishmael. So that's the first thing that we have.
Would you make that statement again about Ishmael? They already have Hagar's son,
Right?
and the Arabs will come from him.
Yeah.
And these people, will the Arabs also come from these people?
Well, Hagar's son is Ishmael.
I know, but now the people that he's sending away.
So he's basically sending everybody away that's not.
These the children of.
Some of these are. You can see here some of this land is named after some of these sons of Keturah.
Okay.
So there's Ishmael's people. We'll come to Ishmael more in a second. They were more widespread than these folks. These folks are kind of right there on the edge of Jordan.
So, is he sending? I mean, Ishmael's already gone away from him.
He
so
will.
Now he's sending away basically any other children that he has from Keturah, right? And
Ishmael will come up in 2 slides.
Okay, now
you're ahead of me.
Are these Arabs as well as Ishmael? The people that
they're non-Jews, so they're pretty much Arabs.
Okay.
Exactly. So the next thing that we have is a little bit about Abraham's death in verse 7. And it tells us that Abraham lived to be 175 years old. Does anybody remember how old he was when he left Haran to go down to the promised land, Canaan?
75, I think.
Yeah, so he's actually been in the promised land 100 years. It's not their land yet. He's living among Hittites and Amalekites and all those other races. but he's been there for 100 years. So he's had quite a bit of time there. He dies in a good old age, full of years. And he's buried with Sarah in that cave that he bought from the Hittites, the cave of Machpelah, which is over east of Mamre a little bit. So this is the end of our first patriarch, the first one that we've really come to.
So Isaac and Ishmael come back. I mean, they come.
Yeah, they come together to bury him. They do.
Okay. So it's not like Ishmael's in not non-communicado.
Yeah.
It's just, I mean,
Yeah,
somehow they come back together, huh?
Mm-hmm. At least for Abraham's burial.
Huh.
I think let's try which one we're talking about. Ishmael is probably still around here because he lives in the next slide. So I think he's still there at this time. But the thing I wanted to point out about this is that Abraham, we think about Abraham, being the father of many people and things like that. But he's more than just a biological father. He's really the father of all people who have faith. And in fact, Jews, Christians, and Muslims all call Abraham their father. All three of the major religions descended from Abraham and his faith. And I wanted to read just briefly here what Paul said about this in Romans 4. This is a really good synopsis, I think, of Abraham's life. This is Romans 4. Which verse are we in here? Romans 4. 16. Paul says, that is why it depends on faith, in order that the promise may rest on grace and be guaranteed to all his offspring, not only to the adherent of the law, but also to the one who shares the faith of Abraham, who is the father of us all. As it is written, I have made you the father of many nations, in the presence of the God in whom he believed, who gives life to the dead and calls into existence things that do not exist. In hope, he believed against hope, that he should become the father of many nations. As he had been told, so shall your offspring be. He did not weaken in faith when he considered his own body, which was as good as dead, since he was about 100 years old, or when he considered the barrenness of Sarah's womb. No distrust made him waver concerning the promise of God, but he grew strong in his faith as he gave glory to God, fully convinced that God was able to do what he had promised. That is why his faith was counted to him as righteousness. But the words that was counted to him were not written for his sake alone, but for ours also. It will be counted to us who believe in him who raised from the dead Jesus our Lord, who was delivered up for our trespasses and raised for our justification. So Abraham, great man, but much more than just a biological father. He was the father of faith for all people who believe, and that's us in this room today. We are all children of Abraham from that perspective of faith. Okay, so we're going to leave him behind now. Any questions about Abraham before we move forward? So the next place, my slides are kind of out of order in here. The next place we're going is to verse 18. And so at the very end of that section, where we have all of the generations of Ishmael, it says in verse 18, they settled from Havilah to Shur, which is opposite Egypt in the direction of Assyria. He settled over and against all of his kinsmen. This is Ishmael that we're talking about, and this is what Gail was asking about. So the territory of the Ishmaelites, and if you want to include the Amalekites in that, is much broader than just those sons of Keturah that he had. And this is all the way from Egypt on the left, all the way over into Jordan on the right, in Havilah. And if you recall, back in Genesis 2, when we looked at the Garden of Eden, Havilah was where one of those four rivers ran through. The Pishon River ran through Havilah, and so there was gold there. So this is old country going all the way back to Garden of Eden times, but you can see how widespread the Ishmaelites are and Amalekites through this whole territory. And there's references there to other things like Amalek attacking Moses at Rephidim over in Exodus and everything. So a lot of times you'll see this just like we've seen a lot of times the Bible talks about covering the whole expanse of the country from the north to the south, from Dan to Beersheba, from east to west, they'll say from Havilah to Shur. It's just a way of saying the whole country, basically. So they're in all of this particular territory. All right, before we get into the next section, I want to take you back and revisit our structure in this book. If you recall, in the very first class, we said there's two big buckets of breakdown. There's this first 10, 11 chapters or so of the patriarchal histories, and then we get into the ancestral narratives, which is where we are now, about the fathers of the Israel nation. And you'll see that we said there were all these different toledotes. Toledote's just a word that means generation. So we have these anchor verses that say, this was the generation of the heavens and the earth. This was the generation of Adam. This was the generation of Noah. So today, we have two of these. First one fairly short in 25:12. This is the Toledot of Ishmael, and that's what we just looked at, his descendants. But after that, in 19, we come to the Toledot of Isaac, which is a little bit longer. This one actually goes all the way up through chapter 35. So we're almost through most of these subsections of Toledots in this particular book. And so that takes us to the birth of Jacob and Esau. Any questions at this point? Just stop for a second. Make sure. I didn't set my alarm, so somebody raise their hand when it's about 10 after, okay? Throw something in. Throw a rock.
On his shoe.
Or a shoe, that will work too. Yeah. Okay, so in 25:19, we have the last little section here is talking about the birth of Jacob and Esau, or next to last section, I guess. And we find out that Isaac was 60 years old when the twins were born. Anybody remember how old he was when he got married?
40.
40, right. So Rebecca has been barren for 20 years. That's a long time. And the text says that she was barren, and so Isaac prayed for her. He probably prayed the whole 20 years. You prayed for something for 20 years before it happened. And that's a long time to be constant in prayer. But I think that's an encouragement to us to keep on praying. You know, when we're praying about something and not seeing results maybe like what we want, you know, he prayed for 20 years before these twins were born. As you recall the story, Esau was the firstborn, and he was red and hairy, which ties into the name Edom, which we'll get to in a second. And then Jacob was holding on to his heel, almost like he was trying to, hey, get out of the way, I'm coming to, trying to pull him back. And so there's some meaning in all these names that we'll get into here. Let me see if, we'll go ahead and do that. So Esau, we don't really know exactly what Esau itself per se means, but his other name is Edom. And Edom basically means, it comes from the Hebrew Adam, which means ruddy or red complected. And he was a red complected individual. The other thing, the other characteristic, and of course Edom winds up being a country, right? The Edomites down south of Moab and Ammon. So that's where these people wind up descending. The other description is that he's hairy. And in the Hebrew, the word for hairy is Sephar. And he settles in the city called Seir. Sephar, Seir. Kind of close. So you can kind of see the wordplay there. Jacob, on the other hand, comes from Yah, which is the J, and Akob, the Akob part of Jacob. And interestingly, Akob kind of sounds like a keb, and a keb means heel. So there's a little play on word there between him grasping the heel, and Yaakov, Jacob, basically means God protects or God follows after Jacob. So Jacob is going to be the son of the promise. That we'll go down from Isaac now to Jacob and to the rest of the 12 tribes. So we're told that Esau was an outdoors guy, skillful hunter, liked to prepare game for his father. Jacob, on the other hand, seemed like a mother's boy kind of. He was quiet and a tent dweller. So not really the outdoorsman kind of guy that Esau was. In verse 27, let's see. It's interesting sometimes the way the translators work with these words. They don't get it quite right. When the boys grew up, Esau was a skillful hunter, a man of the field, while Jacob was a quiet man dwelling in tents. A quiet man dwelling in tents. The word there, quiet, would be one translation of it, but another translation of that might be better would be simple, a simple man dwelling in tents. And the word there, which is tam, basically means innocence or integrity. So when you think about Jacob, how many of you think about innocence and integrity? He's kind of a trickster, isn't he? A little bit of a trickster. And what's interesting about that is that the other word, that word tam, that means innocence or integrity, is the opposite of another word like we just looked at, akab, that means crooked and hard. So maybe the crooked and hard is a little bit more accurate than the innocent or integrity part. I think the main thing here, though, is much like we saw with Abraham, Jacob is going to change. He's a trickster in the beginning, no question. We're going to look at the birthright and the stew and all that in a second. But over time, he does tend to mature, not just physically, but spiritually as well. And so becomes the main patriarch of the nation of Israel. Okay, so this is where Edom was. Again, we're looking down south of Ammon in the north. Ammon and Moab are what we call Jordan today. They're on the other side of the Dead Sea there. And then directly south of that is Edom, where Esau's descendants lived. And these are some other pictures, the mountains of Eden and Martin, Jordan. I noticed on Facebook the other day that Enoch was over there. He's been over in the Holy Land, and he sent some pictures of, I think in Petra, maybe.
I've been there. I have pictures.
Yeah. We didn't go, but I think you went, didn't you? You went to Jordan? Yeah. We did not go to Jordan. And then here is a map of the journeys of Isaac, which we'll be getting into. Again, Edom down here, Moab and Ammon over here. James keeps telling me I need to do it on this picture up here instead of on that, so y'all can't see. Okay, so places of note. In a minute, we're going to come to Gerar, which is right over here on the coast. This is where Abimelech is. So we're going to have a little interaction with him. And then Esek and Shitna are the two wells that we'll be talking about here in a second. This is Salem or Jerusalem later, and Hebron due south of that. And down here is Beer Lahai, which is where Isaac is living, right down here at this time. So just to point out a few things there. Where's the attendance?
Right
It's over here.
Got it? Is it going around? Okay.
I got it.
Thank you. Keep me honest. All right, so there are quite a few similarities. I'm going to need glasses for this. Quite a few similarities between Abraham and Isaac. And we'll just kind of run through this list quickly, but I think you'll recognize that in both stories of Abraham and of Isaac, there's a famine. You know, Abraham goes down to Egypt. That's why Isaac goes to Gerar in a minute. They both have a sojourn in Gerar. In fact, they both meet with Abimelech. That's probably two different Abimelechs, but we'll get to that in a second. God appears to them, so there's this appearance, theophany, to both of them. They both are asked to go someplace where they don't know where they're going, which demonstrates a lot of faith on both of their parts, I think. They are both given promises of land and seed, not seed to grow things, but progeny, descendants. And they are also given covenant promises, very specific covenant promises like blessings and seed like the stars and means of blessings for all nations. But they're also given some general blessings as well. They have this wife-sister thing that will play out here in a minute. They both get very wealthy. They both run into conflicts with the Philistines. That's over in that Gerar area near the coast. They're tent dwellers. They're really nomads. They don't live like we do in houses in a location and address. They move around quite a bit. They do a lot of digging and naming of wells, and they make covenants with Abimelech. And then they name that well Beersheba. Beersheba, I guess would be the Hebrew. Okay, so this gets us to the story of the birthright, which is at the very end of 25, I believe. Yes. So you all remember this story. I'm not going to read it per se from the text. Just a few things to note about that. This is 25:29. Again, when Esau comes in, this is where he gets his name Edom instead of Esau. He comes in and he's famished. He's been out hunting, I guess. Maybe didn't catch anything. He's hungry. And Jacob has made this red lentil stew. And he goes, I want some of that Adam. I want some of that red stuff. And so he winds up picking up the name Edom, which means red, from that. And also, in this little scenario, we have a violation of, we talked about Bakora, I think, last week. Anybody remember what Bakora was? That was the right of the firstborn. So Esau is the firstborn. By Bakora, he should get 50% at least of the inheritance. But in this scenario, Jacob winds up swindling him out of that. So you give me your birthright, I'll give you the red stew, right? So, and Isaac is so, what's the word? Easily persuaded, I guess, that he says, okay, what good's a birthright anyway? If I die, I won't need one. So, right? So he goes ahead and gives up his birthright, which he regrets later.
Well, he despised his birthright, didn't he?
He did. He despised his birthright.
I
think he despised it after he realized he'd given it up. Yeah. He said, uh-oh, what have I done here?
Do you think despise is really a good translation?
I didn't look at the Hebrew on that, but probably. I think what he's saying is that he kind of was regretting what he had done later. In the moment, he was impetuous. That's the word I was looking for. Yeah. He was impetuous. It's like, it's all about my belly. I'm hungry. I want something to eat. Forget birthrights. And so he was so impetuous. And I think that's why he's kind of spoken of in a bad light over in Hebrews, because he was just kind of given in to the moment and had no self-control whatsoever. And lost his
regard for God.
Huh?
No regard for God's law.
Right, exactly. And he would have been blessed by it had he abided by it, but he gave that up.
Comes to
That
mind
might be a
there.
lesson for all of us, when we're tempted to just kind of go for whatever's right in front of us. Sometimes holding back could be helpful.
It brings to mind another impetuous story from the New Testament when, and I don't remember the specifics, but the fella who's asked for something and said, "I'll give you the first thing that comes out of the house."
Oh yeah.
And his daughter came out.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
We got a couple of lessons of being
Aaron's daughter,
impetuous.
right? Getting John the Baptist's head there. That wasn't what he was expecting her to ask for, I'm sure. Okay, interesting paintings here. This one is from Jan Victor's. He saw in the massive porridge. It's just lentil stew, so it's no fancy meal or anything, but he was starving, so he took it. So in 26, I do want to take a second here and read this. We have God's promise to Isaac. We've had God's promise to Abraham, and a lot of that has already been fulfilled. So here in 26, that comes down to his son Isaac. So 26 says, "Now there was a famine in the land, besides the former famine that was in the days of Abraham. And Isaac went to Gerar to Abimelech, king of the Philistines. And the Lord appeared to him and said, Do not go down into Egypt, dwell in the land of which I shall tell you. Sojourn in this land, and I will be with you and will bless you. For to you and to your offspring I will give all these lands, and I will establish the oath that I swore to Abraham your father. I will multiply your offspring as the stars of heaven, and will give to your offspring all these lands, and in your offspring all the nations of the earth shall be blessed, because Abraham obeyed my voice and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws. So the covenant is passing down to Isaac really because of Abraham, because of his faithfulness in fulfilling those things. Isaac really hasn't done much at this point of his own, unless you count maybe letting him tie him up on the altar when he was going to sacrifice him. But other than that, Isaac hasn't really shown much faith of his own at this point. But Abraham certainly did. And because of that, all of these promises accrued to Isaac. He's going to with him, bless him, all these lands, that same oath that he gave to Abraham, offspring and all nations being blessed. So, in chapter 26, we have the interaction of Isaac with Abimelech. And this is like the third iteration of this, right? This is the wife-sister story thing. First it was Abraham and Pharaoh, and then later in chapters 20 and 21, it was Abraham and Abimelech, and now it's Isaac and Abimelech. One thing I thought it might be interesting to point out is that this is probably not the same Abimelech that Abraham dealt with, because if you go back and look at the timing on it, in chapters 20 and 21, Abraham was about 100 years old, and he's died now at 175. So this is 75 years later. It could be, but it's likely this is Abimelech's son, who's also named Abimelech, most likely. So I'm not going to read this whole chapter, but we've read the other two, and I hope you all have read this this week. So did you see any similarities between Isaac and Abimelech and Abraham and Abimelech over in 20 and 21?
They both said, "This is not my wife. This is my sister."
Okay. So, and interesting thing about that, we'll get to in a second, I think, is that when Abraham said that, it was true. Mm-hmm. Was it true for Isaac? Was Rebecca his sister? She's a cousin, but she wasn't a sister, right? So Isaac is lying. Abraham didn't lie. Technically, Abraham, she was his half sister. So that's a little bit of a difference. What else? See anything else about? James, how do I make it fill in? Do I just slide it back? Or do I touch it? Oh, there we go. So there's one. Polish nailed the first one. What else do you see that's similar? What do they both have a dispute over? What are they always digging? Wells, yeah. Dispute over water, right? So in both cases, they dispute over water. And in both cases, they have concluded with the treaty of friendship. So they come away at a good place. But there are also some differences. So one of the differences, anybody else see? What do you note any differences before I show you what I got? Okay, in one, Abimelech, this Abimelech, if it's a son, doesn't take her into his harem. The other Abimelech took her into his harem and then said, "Whoa, wait a minute, it's your wife." So that doesn't happen here. There isn't any kind of reward or settlement here. In the other case, he got gifts. But even with Pharaoh, he got gifts. And with Abimelech, the first time he got gifts, Abraham did. No gifts, no settlement here that we see. There is this quarrel over the two wells, which we'll get to here in a second. And then they also dig another well separate from those two wells, which is Bathsheba. And the treaty with Abimelech is not over a well per se. It's just a kind of a standing treaty. I think that's the last one. Yeah, that's the last one. So in verse 7, we're told that Rebekah was attractive. I guess that should be on the similarity list too, because Sarah was attractive, even though she was 100 years old. She was attractive. Verse 8 is really interesting. This is another place where translations don't do you very well. I'm using ESV. 27 or 28 or 28? 26, thank you, back me up. So what I have in verse 8 is, when he had been there a long time, Abimelech, king of the Philistines, looked out of a window and saw Isaac laughing with Rebekah's wife. Anybody else have anything different there besides laughing?
Caressing.
Caressing, yeah, that's a little better. I was a little disappointed in the ESV. Usually it's pretty good, but they didn't do too well with that.
So you could say caressing is a good translation?
Actually, playing is the word there can mean either laughing or playing, and playing is probably, well, what would it matter if he was laughing with his wife? I mean, how would he know, that it wasn't his wife, just because they're laughing?
My version says showing endearment.
Yeah, the word, it has the connotation, really has a sexual connotation of
Right.
either like fondling or foreplay or something like that. So that's why he knows it's not his sister. He wouldn't be doing that to his sister, right? So
I don't know back then.
well, yeah. We don't think so. Maybe today, but we don't think so. So anyhow, that's the difference there. And then we have these two wells that they're fighting over. One was called Sept, which means contention, and the other one is called Sitna, which means accusation or hostility. So they're fighting over these two wells. Water is a really big deal in Israel. If you've been there, there's not much water in that country. The very little that they have is up north where the Dan River is, and there's a little bit of water up there that runs over the Jordan, but most of the country is really dry. And they have to have a lot of irrigation support in order to be able to grow crops and stuff like that. It's always been like that. So
It's that way throughout Egypt and
Yeah.
Jordan too.
yeah,
And
the
all
whole Middle
those.
East is like that,
Yeah,
really.
there's they dig for oil more than they do water.
Yeah.
Why would God have called this a land flowing with milk and honey if it's this barren desert type land?
Yeah, well, it is productive. I mean, it just needs water. And they would, they get water on Mount Hermon where it snows, and then some of that's what really forms the Jordan River, and some of it they could catch and put in cisterns and that sort of thing. So they just need support for it. But it's a very fertile land, and they do have lots of agriculture there. And the food there is awesome. So it is really a land flowing with milk and honey, but it just has to have water.
Spiders came back with some very productive
That's right.
crops.
That's right. After this, there is another well that his folks go off and build called Rehoboth, which means open spaces. So now they've got a little separation between the wells so that there's not so much conflict between Isaac's people and Abimelech's people. And then in verse 33, we have, this is where we get into Beersheba or Beersheba, where that same day, on 32, that same day Isaac's servants came and told him about the well that they had dug and said to him, "We have found water." He called it Sheba, which sounds like the Hebrew word for oath, and therefore the city is Beersheba or Beersheba to this day. So you remember last week we talked about Beer means well, and Sheba can mean either seven or oath, and they did 7 oaths in that process. So that's why it is named that. That becomes a kind of an important place as we go forward. Beersheba does. Is it 5 after? 10 o'clock. Okay. We'll do 28 really quickly because there's not much in 28. So it's interesting this is 27. Okay. If you look at that passage about the blessing, it appears that Isaac is about to die because he tells him, rise up. He's like he's bedridden. He's telling him to rise up and to this page, on the wrong page, to be able to. He can't see. He's blind, so he's pretty old, obviously. And it just sounds like that he's pretty close to death, although we aren't really told anything about that right away. And then obviously there was some ethnic interest in the second blessing. He does bless Esau, but the blessing is not nearly as good as the blessing that Jacob got. And then in 28, we have Jacob sent way back up to Mesopotamia to Laban to find a wife for Jacob. Esau winds up marrying an Ishmaelite. He finds out that Isaac and Rebekah don't like the Canaanite women around them, and so he's okay. Now I'm gonna go marry one. So he's already married two, and now he goes and marries one of Ishmael's daughters as well, just to screw in a little tighter. And in 28 is where we have Jacob's dream. This is the Stairway to Heaven by Raphael, back in 1518. Not the song, but the picture. Let's see, what can we talk about in 5 minutes here? Some other depictions of this. This is the first time God has appeared to a patriarch in a dream. Now, he has appeared, obviously, to Abraham and Isaac and talked to them, but this is the first time in a dream. The stairway is really more of a ladder. The word there, sulam, means ladder, and it's really the only time it's used in the Bible. It's that particular word, is this ladder thing. And probably what he's dreaming about is, we talked about these ziggurats back with the Tower of Babel, and that was a common thing. Abraham certainly had seen ziggurats because he was from Ur of the Chaldees. Isaac may have traveled back there and seen these things. So this is probably what his dream is all about when he sees this stairway to heaven, if you will. In fact, verse 12, it could be called a ramp as opposed to a ladder. But this is the place that, formerly known as Luz, will be called Bethel, which means house of God. And basically, he has this encounter or this dream with angels and God coming up and actually talks with God. God speaks to Jacob during this particular setting. So I think we'll probably stop there. Because the next part is Leah and Rachel. So we'll pick up with Leah and Rachel next week. We got I'll put about 3 slides, so that's not bad. We'll have plenty of time next week since it's a short chapter. But any questions over? I was really fast because it's a lot of material. But any questions?
This is not really a question.
Yeah, comment?
Esau came to Abraham in tears,
Oh yeah.
wanting to bless me, Lord.
Yeah. One second. I wanted to read that blessing. It's really interesting when you compare them. Where was it? 35. Yeah, here it is. Here it is. And so he came near and kissed him, and Isaac smelled the smell of his garments and blessed him and said, oh, is this the first one? This is it. Okay. See, the smell of my son is as the smell of a field that the Lord has blessed. May God give you the dew of heaven, the fatness of rain. Now, this is the blessing for Isaac. I was looking for the blessing for, here it is, 39. This is the blessing for Esau. I love this. Behold, away from the fatness of the earth shall your dwelling be, and away from the dew of the high. By your sword you shall live, and you shall serve your brother. But when you grow restless, you shall break his yoke from your neck, from his neck. I mean, what kind of blessing is that, right? Not a very good one. But that, unfortunately, that's kind of still going on today. That's the root of the Arab-Israeli conflict right there, in that blessing that Abraham gave to Isaac.
Do you think that sort of curse, we would see it more
Yeah,
as a curse?
it's more as a
than
curse.
blessing. Do you think that still applies to that?
Probably. I mean,
Those
they're still
people,
at each
the
other's
Arabs?
necks.
Pardon?
They're still at each other's necks.
Well,
There's-
do you think though that sort of curse still applies to the Arab people?
Probably. I mean, the promise was for Jacob's descendants. And again, you have to keep in mind, the promise wasn't for them, but it was that we could all be blessed through them. And because that's the line, Jacob and Judah, and then Judah, and then King David, and then King David and Jesus. So the salvation comes through that lineage and not through any of the others. So, but
We
yeah,
have-
they're still throwing rockets at each other, so I expect
We have all
they're
the-
probably still in effect.
We have all these other characters that appear in there, but the main characters are where Jesus came through.
Yeah,
He's
exactly.
descended from.
Yeah.
But Esau was actually a twin, so
Yeah.
it could have gone either way.
All right, so next week we're going to do 31 through 34. If you want to read ahead, that'll help, because I've got probably one time to read all the text. But we'll pick up with Rachel and Leah.